She didn't pull me aside or lower her voice. She handed the divorce papers to me out on the courthouse steps, her own cameras rolling right in front of everyone. And she laughed, not the nervous kind. Not embarrassed either. The laugh of someone sure they've already won. Then she went to stand with Matthew, slipped her arm in his and faced the cameras, wouldn't even look at me. She told the press I was broke, announced it like it was fact, claimed to have checked and the cameras ate it up, but she never checked in the right place. Here's what nobody standing there knew. I'd been waiting for this for over a year. I tracked every account she touched, every dollar she tried to move, every signature she faked. It was all right there, documented. In just a few hours, a judge would read my real net worth aloud, in open court, with Beatrice sitting 6 feet away. I picked up the papers, tucked them under my arm, walked up the courthouse steps, and didn't bother to look back. If you've ever had someone count you out before actually doing their homework, subscribe. Because what happened inside that courtroom, it still hits me differently than I ever thought it would. But none of this really started on the courthouse steps. It started 14 months earlier, in a quiet room, staring at numbers that just didn't add up. It was a Tuesday when I found it. 340 grand gone, 11 months, all siphoned off through a household sub-account I'd given Beatrice. I read the statement once, twice, 3 times. Closed the laptop and just sat there in the dark. There it was, spread out in the transfer logs. Same account, same pattern, almost a year's worth of withdrawals. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. You'd think that number would have made me furious, but really it made me careful. That much money doesn't just vanish. Somebody was patient, never reckless. Someone who knew the system from the inside and took what they could once they were sure how. I thought about going downstairs, asking her point blank. But I built my company brick by learning. Once you tip your hand, you lose the room, so I didn't. I opened a new document and typed 3 words, Basel Trust, Phase 1. That night I called just one person, a forensic accountant from an old fraud case. I need complete discretion, I told him. He didn't even ask why. Guess he'd heard this sort of thing before. Down the hall, I heard Beatrice laughing into her phone about something or someone else. I turned back to my monitors. She thought the company ran my life and I barely noticed her or our accounts. She was half right. But from that night on, for 14 months, I noticed everything. Every transfer, every sudden meeting, every quiet document shift. I never said a word. Just moved every important asset somewhere safer. Not to hide, but to protect. There's a difference. She was about to find out how much that difference cost her. I started pulling on the thread, and once you start, you can't stop. 8 months. That's how long they'd been laying out their plan before I even caught a whiff of it. James O'Connor, her attorney, built a legal narrative designed to make me look reckless and cash poor. Every document painted me as a liability, the company as doomed, Beatrice as the supportive spouse betrayed. None of it true, all of it polished enough that any judge unfamiliar with the other file, well, they might buy it. Lucky for me, James didn't know about the real paperwork sitting quietly in a different file. 6 months back, Beatrice signed a document transferring an empty shell of a company to herself. Thought she'd grabbed a real stake, something she could flash in court. But that company, emptied weeks before. She signed for nothing, smiled for nothing. Looking back through my calendar, I noticed she started planning all this, moving assets, laying groundwork, before she even tried to bring up the idea of divorce over dinner. That could have shattered me. Instead, it just made things clear. Once you accept you're reading the situation right, it all snaps into focus. There were details in our original agreement. James O'Connor himself had drawn them up that they both missed. I had to keep quiet. Confidence makes people sloppy, so I let them waltz into court thinking they'd already won. Truth is, that's when they stopped checking their own work. Sitting across the courtroom from Beatrice was stranger than any other confrontation I've had. She looked like she'd dressed for a coronation. I noticed, but I didn't say a word. James strutted his case, 3 binders, color-coded, tabs everywhere. The whole thing was engineered to dazzle the judge before the facts ever arrived. My lawyer. 1 folder unopened for 40 minutes. James went in hard. 8 minutes of pure demolition, calling me careless, evasive, a failure. He repeated that word 4 times. I counted. Beatrice just nodded along, face tragic, performance of a lifetime. She was remarkable, honestly. I'd underestimated her. That's on me. The crowd was buying it. You make a lie solid enough and it feels like the truth, at least for a while. James needed those first impressions set in before the audit file arrived. Because after that, that's all he'd have left, impressions. I watched them finish up their act. Both of them were sure the job was done. Neither could have been more wrong. Then finally, the judge. He didn't even look at James' binders, picked up something else, a sealed envelope. I'd been waiting months for this. He set his glasses aside, slow and deliberate, and finally said the thing I'd waited 14 months to hear. Before we proceed, I've requested an independent audit of all financial holdings associated with the Basil estate. James tried to muscle through it, claimed they'd already submitted every record. The judge just cut him off. Sit down. And in that instant, those binders shifted from trophies to dead weight. Out came my real file, filed directly with the court clerk weeks ago, just in case O'Connor tried to block it. No way for him to close that door from inside the room now. Beatrice panicked, whispering to O'Connor. He just shook his head, the first honest gesture I'd seen from him all day. And in my jacket, I still had the original clause James wrote. Never looked at it twice, didn't see the trap he'd built for himself. The judge set the audit aside and picked up his pen. Let the record reflect. What happened next silenced the whole courtroom. The Basil Trust, the judge read, established 14 months ago. Primary intellectual property holdings, liquid assets and controlling shares in 4 tech companies. Current independent valuation. And then he read it. I'm not repeating that number. Just know this, everyone heard it differently. My lawyer calm confirmation, the audience, shock James, watching months of work evaporate in seconds. Beatrice heard the figure she'd chased for a year, and in that moment she realized it was never within reach. She fell apart quietly, not a meltdown, more like a light going out. Beatrice turned to James. He was already scribbling, desperate for an exit he knew didn't exist. The judge kept reading, every account, every asset, every missing dollar, flagged, dated, attributed right where it belonged. When he finished, he looked right at O'Connor. Counselor, would you like to explain the predatory spouse clause? The silence after that question was the longest I've ever felt. Only 6 seconds, but it didn't feel like time anymore. James found the clause. Read it, stone-faced. Not collapse or drama, just the face of a man accepting the sting of his own fine print. He'd written that clause himself 3 years ago. Thought it was boilerplate, never gave it a second glance. My accountant read it 11 times. The judge read it for the record. Any attempt to defraud, misrepresent, or act in bad faith against the other party's financial holdings constitutes a predatory action. Predatory action triggers full financial penalty, payable immediately upon court ruling. The judge set the contract down, glanced at O'Connor. The clause is enforceable. That was it. James opened his mouth. Judge cut him off again. I've read the filing. James shut it. No more performances from Beatrice. Just a woman, listening to her own conspiracy being used as evidence against her. 4 pages, the judge's order, every line against her. In 4 minutes, he dismantled what Beatrice spent the last 8 months building. James kept writing, no longer plotting escapes, just documenting damage. She said his name, soft, broken, quietly realizing that the man she thought was her champion was the reason she was here. James never looked up. In that moment, anything she'd managed to hold onto let go. When the gavel finally hit, Eddie's lawyer stood and offered his hand. I took it. I didn't look back at Beatrice. No bitterness, just nothing left to add. The court had said everything. Two men stood by the gallery doors, new faces. Beatrice noticed them. James didn't. I'd spent 14 months mapping every move for that day. Leaving the room, I realized I'd barely thought about life beyond that verdict. For the first time in ages, I felt like my own thoughts belonged to me again. Walking outside, no speech, no cameras, just me and the city waiting. I didn't stop for the press, didn't wave or explain. The man who would have done that had disappeared somewhere during those midnight asset shuffles while Beatrice laughed downstairs on the phone. That old self, he's long gone. Good riddance. Bottom of the steps, I stopped. Looked forward, not back at the courthouse, but out to what's next. The empire stayed intact. My name was clean. The future finally was mine. 3 things I doubted for so long, set straight in one afternoon because a judge just read the truth out loud. I'm telling you, this isn't about the money. It wasn't about a legal clause. It's about patience, about knowing that being quiet, methodical, and alert is the only weapon nobody can strip from you. I didn't win because I was louder. I won because while everyone else was busy performing, I was just getting ready. Month after month, quietly. If you made it to the end, hit subscribe. Tell me, when did you know Beatrice had already lost? I read every comment. Until next time, the courtroom doesn't lie. Neither do I.